So, hello and welcome to Dancing in the Daily, a home for changemakers, caretakers, healers, and everyday community builders. Together, we are working to call in more love, joy, and connection into our world. I am so grateful to have joining us Vu Lee, who is the founder and writer of the amazing and hilarious blog Nonprofit AF, where he offers critiques and reflections on the nonprofit sector. Today, we're going to be discussing self-image and confidence for change makers. Thank you so much, Vu, for joining us today.
Thanks, Erica, for having me.
Yes. So I want to start with a bit of your backstory, right? How did you enter the nonprofit sector? What was your journey? Did you always dream of this, or is it something you fell into?
I always dreamed about becoming a hypnotherapist, using hypnosis to help people. And then I wanted to become an artist, and then I wanted to become a doctor. Um, None of those things worked out. I got a master's in social work, which made my parents not very happy. And then I ended up in the nonprofit sector, which I think is where I belong. It's great here.
Now, what was it like going from social work into the nonprofit? Because I feel like that's a common transition for folks. But what was it like for you?
It was good, although I think that a lot of the things that we were taught in social work school are great, and a lot of things were just not taught there. Like all
Mm.
these dynamics, all the we talked about equity, we talked about like these standard best practices, but I think a lot of the best practices just did not work out in the real world. Like we learned
Mm.
about boards, for example, and then I got into the field and I realized a lot of board practices are just terrible and they don't work for a lot of communities. So it's been interesting.
So, what was your first kind of job at a nonprofit?
Well, I couldn't get a job because no one would hire me because I didn't have experience, right? So
Common.
I got this job um, with this AmeriCorps program that sent me to a small nonprofit, and I was basically an AmeriCorps for 2 years, AmeriCorps member for 2 years.
And what were you doing during that time? What was that like? Because AmeriCorps, I did AmeriCorps Jumpstart when I was in college. So I did my work study program at a child care center, and I actually they got me because I ended up entering early childhood education. So the program technically worked.
It did. It was great. It didn't pay very well. I ended up eating spaghetti for a lot of the meals, but it also set me on this path to doing what I'm doing.
And then coming out of the AmeriCorps experience, what was next for you?
Well, I was placed at this small Vietnamese organization that was really focused on Vietnamese immigrants, refugees who just arrived to the United States. And my job was basically to handle everything at that organization. I was the only staff there that first year.
Mm.
And the second year, there was another AmeriCorps person there. And we ended up running the whole organization, everything, fundraising, programming, operations, all of it. And then I became the executive director of that organization for the next 7 years.
Wow. Oh my goodness, 7 years. So you really played every single role and you got to see every single side of what it means to work in a nonprofit.
Yeah, that's why I've aged so much, right?
Oh
It
my
ages you. Look at all this gray hair. It really does.
goodness. So in that very first nonprofit, I feel like the first, your kind of first role is like this really special experience. I think about me when I came out of college, my first role was at a labor union. And I was a community and labor organizer in the field. And like the things that I learned having to like hit the street, I was organizing fast food workers and I would chase after them as they're coming out the parking lot. But like it just gave me this level of tenacity, like fearlessness, right? Because you can't be scared if you want to go up to somebody in the middle of the night when they're getting off their shift. What were some things that you like that really shaped you from that first experience?
Yeah. Well, this is where I realized that a lot of the things that we were taught
Mhm.
are our best practices are not best for a lot of communities, right? I was taught like this is how boards work, this is how leadership looks like, this is what you do to get money, this is what capacity building is for organizations. And then I tried to apply these things, and I realized that a lot of the philosophies and practices just don't really work. For example, this idea that you have to teach people to fish, right? Like we should all learn how to fish. Every nonprofit should learn like finance fishing and evaluation fishing and whatever. And so all these nonprofits were scrambling, trying to do like 20 highly specialized skills when they don't have any staffing. And then funders are like, we sent you to like 5 workshops this year and you're still stuck. Like, what is going on? And that's because they're just using this lens that just doesn't work for everyone. So a lot of things like fundraising, for example, like this is how you do fundraising. Make sure you tell donors that they're heroes, and make sure you use the word "you" 25 times in every appeal letter, etc. And it doesn't really work for a lot of our communities. So that was a really important lesson for me. I also learned that a lot of things are just made up. Like people just been making stuff up, and we can make stuff up too. And so that was helpful. We're talking about confidence, right? I think that a lot of leaders, especially leaders from marginalized communities, are like, oh my gosh, I have to learn the game. And so I can play it better. Like, that's why I'm so nervous right now because I'm not familiar with the game yet. Well, y'all, the game is totally made up by other people. Okay. You can just jump right into it and make up your own shit too.
Right, right. I mean, it's so true because I think, at least, and I'm wondering if you've seen this in your experience as well, but definitely in my experience, I remember when I was starting my early childhood nonprofit program, and there were other peers that I recognized, like, oh, like these are like white women who have no background in early childhood education, who just like little kids and are either starting programs or being hired to like come from the business world and enter this field, but they have no, like, this is not their background, and yet they have so much confidence as a leader in this space. And then I saw myself as someone who's actually been educated and worked as a preschool teacher, and I, constantly being questioned, constantly being doubted by others. And then I started to doubt myself, and that was really, really hard for me. I'm wondering for you and your journey at that first organization, but even in the next nonprofit that you helped to create, talk to me about like, just like, how did you navigate that relationship with funders, with partners, right? Like, and nurturing your confidence in that space, right? You talk about this idea of like funders, why didn't you get all the evaluation done after we sent you to those 5 workshops? Like, how could you come out of a conversation like that, right? And still walk away feeling like confident and empowered?
It took a while, to be honest, right? Because we're kind of fighting against all of these narratives that people have been put on us, right? Have been saying this is how you do things. You need to earn your dues and or whatever, like all these different things. So I think after a while you start to absorb these messages. And like I remember going to a room that was full of funders or donors and feeling extremely intimidated because I'm like, oh God, I'm just a new person. I don't have the same experience or the same relationships. And what I can bring is my perspective from my community, etc. But these are like powerful people. And then I think after being in the same room with these folks for a while, there's some really good people in these rooms. But then there's a lot of people who are just like, why are you in this room? And why are you so confident when you don't have the same level of experience? So just watching people who just have way less validity, experience, skills than you do, having this level of confidence. And I think after a while, I was like, why? That makes no sense. So I start to think about, I start to notice these patterns of leaders of color, for example, women of color, other people who have experienced like a lot of injustice and thus are the experts, going to a room and talking about education or poverty or whatever. And like all these people who are more removed from these issues having the microphones, having the attention. And I start to notice and point out these patterns, right? And I started to kind of figure out that, hey, my role, like I don't understand why I would be the one speaking up and saying things or encouraging others to do this when they are more qualified than the people who we think are the ones who are qualified.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. That makes me think of your work with RVC, Rainier Valley Corps, now rooted in vibrant communities in the Pacific Northwest. At what point did you decide to kind of create or co-create RVC? What was the pain point for you? Why were you like, I have to do this?
Yeah, well, after working at VFA, my former organization, for a while, and realizing that a lot of things just did not work, right? We were hearing constantly that, like, why aren't the Vietnamese community-led organizations improving and building infrastructure? And the same for all the other ethnic organizations, right? All other communities of color-led organizations. And so I went and talked to my friends who are leading these organizations. And I said, hey, the funders are kind of wondering, why aren't you developing? Like, why? You've been around for 80 years and you still have like one full-time staff. What is going on? And, you know, and it made me think like, well, first of all, well, how do we define success, right? We think that
Mhm.
infrastructure is success. We think like, oh, this organization only has one staff, then it's not successful. But the reality is that this organization has been serving hundreds of people every week, even with one full-time staff
Mhm.
and hundreds or thousands of volunteers. They still manage to do amazing work, more work than like a more infrastructured organization, right?
Very common.
Very common. And but it also can be burning people out a bit. So I asked them like, what would be helpful for you? And they're like, well, we need money, we need staffing, we need people to come by, and like, if funders want us to have staff, then they should like fund our staff and stop sending us to 500 workshops. Those are completely useless. You can't do anything if you don't have anyone to actually implement the things that you learn at these workshops. So 1,000 workshops are completely useless if you don't have staff to implement, right? So that was why like RVC was created, and it took what I learned from AmeriCorps, being an AmeriCorps member, and applying
Mhm.
it to RVC. So then we
Okay.
started creating this program where we found these leaders of color
Mhm.
and who were engaged and who wanted to work in community, and we provide them with a 2-year placement at these
Mm.
organizations.
Okay.
And they get paid more than they would as AmeriCorps members, right? Um and it works. It was great. Many of these leaders are still in the field and they're doing incredible work.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things that you like learn from that process? What did you notice in the leaders? Like first of all, what made a good applicant, right? Like what were you looking for in a leader that you wanted to invest in or support? And then what were they coming out? What kind of experiences were they coming out with?
Yeah, well, the leaders we were looking for were those who were really dedicated to doing this work. They might be a little bit um, feeling challenged by their family sometimes, because we're not encouraged by our cultures oftentimes to go into this line of work, right?
Yes.
So yeah, but they were dedicated. They wanted to learn. They're open to feedback, and they can see this. They can see the vision for the organization that they're placed at, and for the program itself, and they are interested in connecting and learning from others in their cohorts. So that was really critical. Was like having a cohort of leaders, and that was really I think one of the biggest successes of the program is a lot of these leaders, they became friends and they are still
Mm.
in touch, and they're really awesome that way.
Oh my goodness. Can you talk more about just the importance of connection and relationship building for change makers in general, whether you're a leader, whether you're a leader volunteer, right? But like, what is the importance of that relationship building? Because I notice that sometimes we can be siloed even within an organization, but definitely within within communities, our work can be siloed sometimes, or within a sector, right? It can be siloed. So what's the importance of connection and relationship building?
It's really vital. When I was starting out my career, like that was one of the best advice someone gave me, was like spend a lot of your time outside the office meeting with
Mm.
other leaders that you look up to. And I remember just like emailing random executive directors, and it was like, "Hey, I heard about you. Like, would you mind like if I just meet with you and I'll buy you coffee or whatever?" Coffee was all I could afford, but I was like, "Yeah." And you know what? A lot of these leaders, they were great. They didn't mind meeting with me. And every leader that I met, I was like, can you introduce me to three other people? Because then you get that warm introduction. And so I was able to build like a really great network of mentors and leaders. And I think it is really critical that you do that, because this work can be, like you said, isolating, and you have to be out there, not just to gather ideas and potential collaboration, but just to like create this community that will support you and protect you sometimes. It's really it's important to do that. And I think that a lot of leaders, especially from marginalized communities, just think that that's not real work. The real work is sitting in front of your computer, typing, writing a report or
Yes.
something. So then we feel guilty when we're out there just hanging out with like another person, doing a walk or whatever. And it is not. That is really important part of the work, because you're gathering energy and ideas and connections, which is vital to being effective at your work.
Yes, yes. And I think, sustaining yourself emotionally as well, like being able to just go and laugh with someone or complain with someone else, or just know that you're not alone in, whatever you're experiencing as in your organization.
Yeah, that's really vital. And we've been seeing just how effective and helpful many of these affinity groups are. So yeah, if you can like go out there, talk to other people, join some affinity groups, and yeah, I mean, there's lots of professional associations and groups that you can join. But you can also expand outside your circle and learn some cool new skills and things too.
Yeah. I also want to ask you about collaboration because um, I have noticed that sometimes that martyr syndrome or the savior complex can get that some folks in the social impact sector can get the ego a bit distorted. And so, I find that we have amazing collaborative people working in nonprofit organizations. We also have the opposite as well. Sometimes when you think, oh, yes, this person's all about community, and then, or this organization is all about community, and then you realize that, oh, there is not an opportunity to collaborate. And so I'm wondering, like, how can you actually create and build a meaningful collaboration? I'm imagining, leaders of color working with each other. But even if someone's, not, let's say it's a larger organization who wants to work with a smaller organization, what does it look like to initiate a collaboration that's rooted in trust and authentic and mutual respect?
Yeah, well, the sector is kind of bad sometimes because we've been trained to play this Hunger Games with one another, right? We've been trained to compete for resources, for grants, for donors, etc. And so collaboration can be difficult to enact and to sustain. But I think it is really vital to our work that we collaborate with one another. But we also need to have some like equity values in mind when we collaborate. I've seen like a lot of larger organizations thinking that they're collaborating with smaller organizations when really what they're doing is using them. And you can tell by their budget, right? If you're really collaborating, then resources should be equitable. And oftentimes these large organizations, like they trickle down small amounts of money to these smaller grassroots organizations. That's not collaboration. That's just using someone, right? And it's not good. So I would say that for really good collaboration to happen, you need to be aligned in your vision and your values, right? So, and people don't spend enough time talking about these things. You need to sit down and be like, okay, our value is equity, and this is what it looks like. Our value is community, and this is what it looks like, and really spell it out. And sometimes I've done this myself. We skip that step of defining values and operationalizing them. And then when the honeymoon period is over, you start getting into conflicts, and then you don't know how to resolve them, and then people start trash talking others, and they're just scheming going around, and just terribleness. I've apologized for most of it, so um but I'll stop scheming. But it happens, and we need to spend more time with the values and the
Yes,
vision.
yes.
Yeah. And the
Okay,
relationship
I
will
want
increase. Yeah.
I want to hear about a mistake or that you've made or a challenge that you've experienced, right, in your work as a leader. Again, you work with multiple organizations, um, and something that you've really been able to learn and grow from. What did you learn from that experience, that challenge that you faced?
Yeah, a while ago, it was the census, right? It was really important. I think it was the 2020 census that was coming up or something. And I had this brilliant idea, like, hey, we should have like a census corps, right? It's like AmeriCorps, but like census corps. We find these amazing leaders who are really interested about the census, and we provide them with a job. And we place them at these organizations to help them with being engaged with the census and getting their community members to fill out the census, etc. Because there's lots of barriers to the census. And I was so excited about that. I wrote a concept paper. I approached some funders initially and was like, "Hey, like Census Corps," and of course, I can be very compelling. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, that's a good idea." Like, and after a while, the staff took me aside and was like, Vu, like, we don't think this is a good idea. Like, did anyone ask for this? Like, did any of these organizations ask for a census corps? Like, did you talk to any of them?" I was like, "Oh no, I'm just really excited about the idea." And they're like, "Okay, yeah, maybe you should, because maybe no one wants a census core member, and they just want money or something, so they can engage with the census whatever in whatever way they want." I was like, "All right, fine." So we didn't do that, right? So that was a good lesson for me, which is, don't be so excited by your own idea that you just get way ahead of everyone else, and you don't check in with people to see whether this idea would actually be helpful to anyone.
Yes, I've definitely been there myself. And I feel like sometimes because you're a founder, right? And you've been an executive director in multiple organizations. And I think there's like that for a lot of founders, right? You're like a catalyst. You have that like fire in you, like, oh, you see an idea, you want to go start it. And so being able to like ebb and flow with that energy, you know what I mean, is a really interesting journey. But I've definitely been the girl like running down the block with the rest of the organization, being like, "Where is she going?"
Yep. I don't know, that energy is exciting. And I think for many of us, we have to kind of see what excites us, and also what are the pitfalls that comes with that. Like for me, I love starting new things. And then sometimes I get very bored after they've been started and they're going well. I was like, "Oh crap, I need to find something else to do." Right? Which is great when it works. Like, I mean, that's how RVC was founded, right?
Yes.
Because after my stint with VFA for 7 years as the ED, I was like, okay, this is going really well now, and it needs new leadership, and I need a new challenge. And
Mhm.
so RVC came about, but RVC was done right because we spent like a whole year interviewing leaders and talking to the community and seeing if this is something that would align with them, and seeing whether funders actually funded. There was a lot of due diligence that went into it, right? So like, don't take that energy for granted, um, but use it wisely, and you can get a lot of good things done.
How did you transition between the two? Did you start fundraising for Rainier Valley Corps when you were still at your previous organization, or did you leave and take that year to do the research, and then how did you? Because those transitions can be kind of hard sometimes for a lot of kind of the ideator, visionary types.
Yeah, luckily for me, I had lots of good advice from mentors who were just like you need to have this runway, and so why don't you start raising money for the first year while you're still at RVC, because you need this challenge. You can still handle all your RVC work and still do this, and it's not a conflict, right? And so that's what I did. So yeah, I spent like basically my last year at RVC transitioning and out of RVC. I mean, my last year at VFA, transitioning out of VFA, and then starting the process to fundraise for RVC. And that first year, I mainly fundraised so that I could have a small salary, and then so I think it was like $180,000 for the total budget, right? That included my salary, all the expenses, and everything that came with it: the rent, utilities, programming aspects, and all of it was included. And once I raised that money, then I transitioned out of RPC. I mean, I gave myself a timeline, like regardless, right? It wouldn't be fair to VFA to just be like, well, I'm just gonna stick around until I raise enough money. Right? But I did give myself like 1 year. I'm gonna leave VFA 1 year. I'm gonna spend this year preparing. Also, VFA was the fiscal sponsor of RVC, so it
Oh,
made it.
amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that thank you for sharing that, because again, I think that there are folks who, have a dream for a nonprofit or a community project or a giving project, foundation, something, maybe a social enterprise or cooperative, and trying to figure out like how you transition to that can be challenging for folks. So it's great to hear how you did it. The last question that I want to ask you is around integrity and kind of like making hard choices. I think that you're someone that I respect you so much because you say things that other people don't want to say. And I love that about your blog, your social media, but just also being in a relationship with you. You are a very honest person. You're open, you're sincere, and, I feel like in the nonprofit space, no one wants to offend the funder, and everyone is, on eggshells, literally, because it's like, I need to get money and I don't want to offend the funder. I don't want to seem like not necessarily the angry organization, but you see people kind of playing that game of optics and all of these different things, right? And nobody wants to be on the out, if you will. And I see you saying really challenging things, bold critiques, and I just really respect that about you. How do you just navigate, walking in your kind of like walking in your truth, walking with that? I'm using the word integrity because that's what I see in you. I don't know if you would use that word, if that feels right, but being, yeah, really trusting how you feel, and then being courageous enough to actually share it with others.
Yeah, I love integrity, and it makes me think of what one of our fellows at RVC, Nate, who said something about integrity that really stuck with me, which is like he thinks of integrity as like wholeness, right? So like, is this thing whole? Um, and so it's kind of like Star Trek, when people are like, "Oh, they're shooting at us, Captain. The shield integrity is at 50%, whatever," right? So the integrity is like, is this thing holding? Is it still in its whole form, or are there cracks in it, and it's not fully what it should be, right? And so I like that sort of framework when we do our work. Like, are we in our fullness? And so our fullness is being able to say things that are difficult, because otherwise we're not really operating with our integrity. And so I think that that's a helpful way for me to kind of put it, as like, am I, being authentic to what I would say? Am I aligning with my values and my vision? And if the answer is yes, then I don't mind offending people. Like, I don't mind. you know. And in some ways you have to offend people, you have to be okay with upsetting people if you're going to do this work effectively. And we also have to have challenge some assumptions that we have. Like, people have these assumptions because of the power dynamics. We have all these assumptions. Like, one of the assumptions is that funders are all delicate, fragile flowers who need to be taken care of, like a little baby bird who need to be nurtured, and you can't tell them hard things. Well, that's kind of insulting to our funding partners. Yeah, a lot of funders and donors can be assholes, but a lot of them are really great people and they can handle some feedback. Okay. So that's one, is that if you, that's an assumption that we have to challenge, is that funders are fragile, they can't handle feedback. A lot of them really need the feedback and they want it. And the other assumption that we make is that if we offend someone, we're going to lose funding. Well, that might be true, but there's also another assumption that we make, which is that if we lose funding, we can't get funding. We can't replace that funding again, right? So are those assumptions really true? And one assumption, well, that first assumption, well, no, yeah, you might lose some money, but you may not. Like, I've never lost funding for RBC for all the things that I say, even though I do get scared of saying these things. But like, there's never been a funder who's like, oh, we are so upset with what you said that we're just not going to fund you. Like, that's never happened. And then the other assumption being, like, if you do lose some money, that you can't get it back. The reality is that that's oftentimes not true. And the opposite is oftentimes true. People love that you are upholding your integrity, and they're more likely to gravitate towards you in the long run. Like, I think over here, one organization, they were very outspoken about defunding the police, supporting defunding the police, and they sent out an email to, I think, to all their donors, saying that this is their stance, etc. And they lost a few donors, but then they gained like 5 more donors for every donor that they lost, because these donors like, yeah, right on, like, we're gonna support you extra hard now because you're standing up to your values, and you're not just like conforming and saying what you think people want to hear, but you're actually doing the work of equity. Like, this is what our sector should be like. We should be fully embracing our integrity. And that means, yeah, we might have to offend some people, but I think in the long run, we're not only going to be okay, we're going to be more effective and happier at doing our work.
Mm. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I definitely, needed to hear that. We are absolutely, I mean, we're never not in a time in history where we don't need integrity, but I definitely feel like, this moment now, we need folks to be able to absolutely speak truth to power, speak their truth, right? And definitely it requires offending people, right? Like, we see it left and right, especially again at this year, this time. So I'm just so grateful for you, and how truthful, how loving your truth is. You're so rooted in love. So I'm deeply grateful for the example that you share. And you're funny as hell. Okay. So not only are you able to do it, with truth and integrity, but you also, put a little sugar on it with some laughter, which is always a, good medicine. So thank you so much, Boo, for who you are, for everything you share with changemakers, and just for the inspiration you bring.
Thank you, Erica. It's always wonderful talking to you.